Bioshock 2, we return to the city of Rapture after 10 years, and while the city might seem a little too familiar, there are enough gameplay enhancements, including the introduction of a fantastic multiplayer experience, that make Bioshock 2 a very worthy addition to the franchise.
Get out of my way!
As great as Bioshock 2 is, it does lack that sense of originality that made the first so great. The environments have evolved, as have the city's inhabitants, and it still is essentially the same place. When we first visited Bioshock back in 2007, Rapture was such an amazing city, an underworld mystery land that had the hopes and dreams of a utopia, but ultimately ended up being a living and breathing hell. Walking around every corner was a complete surprise, and unfortunately, that element of shock at the city's atmosphere just isn't as strong the second time round. Furthermore, the city itself in Bioshock 2 lacks the thrills of the first. It will still stay with you once you finish it, no doubt, but it lacks the imaginative pull that the first game offered. The plot itself isn't that bad, but its main issue falls into the lap of the main antagonist in Sophia Lamb. In the first game, Andrew Ryan was a creative, intriguing madman whose passion for the city of Rapture eventually took hold of him. This passion, fused together with the atmospheric tension that is the city of Rapture, helped mount a strong narrative. This second time round, Sophia is essentially the complete opposite of Ryan. She lacks the godlike, intimidating presence that Ryan had, and instead appears like more of a supernatural crazy lady. Furthermore, there is little to no focus on the history of Rapture, which was actually an integral part of the first game's story. In Bioshock, we were told of the history of the city through journals and the like scattered throughout the city. This ultimately helped make the city a character itself, and stretch the limits of the narrative. Bioshock 2 never really touches on the history of the city, so if you never played the first, you might find it difficult to actually care about what is going on. The story is anything but accessible for newcomers to the series, and it seems like the developers have done a major injustice to the brilliant city that is Rapture by ignoring its colourful past completely. However, the story does have its moments of brilliance. For what it's worth, Bioshock 2 does provide an overall memorable narrative, as broken as it may be in some parts. While it might be unexplained and not as powerful as it could have been, the relationship between the Big Daddy and Eleanor actually has the potential to wring a tear from your eye. What the first game did was generate a touching story surrounded by terrifying ideals in a tough and dark and frightening city. Bioshock 2 essentially offers the exact same thing, but not quite as well or as aggressively.
An artist strives to frame his ideals in an image, to challenge his audience.
Just as the walls of the city have aged 10 years, as have the inhabitants. Sophie's partners in crime, known as the Family, are mainly splicers you'll all remember from the first, but with some minor improvements. The familiar ones that attack from sides, sprint up walls and jump at you at blistering speeds all return from the first game, but this time they attack in groups as opposed to individually. You'll also come across the Brute Splicer, which is an overgrown version of the Splicer and has the potential to knock your Big Daddy down with little effort. It's good to see things mixed up a bit as opposed to using the same old enemies. The city has evolved by 10 years, so naturally, social things living in it. It's a natural progression of life. Whatever we have access to ultimately assists in the evolution of our appearance and mentality. The moral dilemmas that plagued our hero in the first game have made a return this second time round. As a Big Daddy, you'll have to rely on Adam in order to adapt to the world as it attacks and attempts to counter your presence. You can get it out of several different ways, by either brutally harvesting a little sister, or adopting one and letting her lead you to corpses around Rapture to harvest their Adam. At the end of the day, you're eventually going to have to make one big decision. You either rescue the little sister and allow her to be transformed back into a real girl, or you harvest her yourself. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Either way, no matter what decision you make, you're always going to have to deal with the consequences, which are pretty much severe in every instance. Once you harvest enough Adam, you can use it to upgrade or splice your DNA, allowing you to use plasmids and other psychokinetic powers during combat. You'll have access to many of the other plasmids from the first game, as well as a whole horde of new ones, as well as some slight upgrades to ones from the predecessor. The developer has done a wonderful job in evolving aspects like this to counter the evolution of the city and its inhabitants, and while the story may lack the pulling power and shock value of the first adventure, the gameplay seems to make up for it no matter how familiar it might be in some aspects. Once you finish the single player, you can move on to the surprisingly entertaining online multiplayer, which offers a fast-paced and at times intense experience. Set shortly before the fall of Rapture in the first game, you play as one of the city's citizens as they test out all of the new plasmids. Most of the 7 modes are slightly altered versions of typical first-person multiplayer modes. The experience itself is quite unique considering the settings and story implemented into it, and it's well worth checking out beyond the single-player experience.
Wilkins is back in the game!
You're coming home with me.
Bioshock 2 may be a little too familiar for fans of the original. While the city and its inhabitants have evolved over time, the game ultimately lacks the sense of originality and imagination that made the first so special. The story definitely has its moments, but lacks some emotional tendencies that were elaborated on so perfectly in the first title. However, the gameplay is improved, with more at your disposal when it comes to combat. Things have changed in the city of Rapture, and it's definitely good to be back. To check out our full written review and read our final score for Bioshock 2, be sure to head on over to my360.com.au and myps3.com.au.
Oh, did the mean girl snub ya?